Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest Boris Johnson related scandal as news emerges that Richard Sharp, a Tory donor, arranged a loan guarantee of £800,000 for Boris Johnson and then, by pure coincidence of course, was appointed chair of the BBC by Boris Johnson a few weeks later. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So isn't it about time we had another Boris Johnson scandal? I mean, you know, he'll be giving evidence to the Privileges Committee soon. I mean, that will create another bit of a scandal. And, but that's a few weeks away. What about a little aperitif in the meantime, to tide us over? Because that's the thing with Boris Johnson. You don't have to wait long before there's another scandal. Major one as well. Though I will just point out that Peter Dukes of Byline Times reckons the timing of this latest Johnson scandal is not coincidental. He thinks it's a deliberate play by Sunak to counter the briefings against his own cabinet by Johnson supporters. And I'll be discussing another one of those tomorrow. It's been a right little flurry of scandals this weekend. Basically a turf war in the Tory party, maybe. All part of the agitation to oust Sunak and replace him with Johnson, to the point where I'll be discussing that in more detail later this week as well. Again, maybe tomorrow, depends. The scandals keep coming. But all I have to say is that if the Tories are mad enough to want to put Johnson back, you go for it. Be utter insanity. And this latest scandal just shows why. At the time Johnson fell, I said absolute madness for his supporters to think that if you give it time, the anger over Partygate, Owen Paterson and other scandals would eventually blow over. They accepted that Boris Johnson was not an electoral asset at that time. They couldn't deny it. He'd lost, not just lost by-elections, he'd lost safe seats in by-elections. It's all right talking about how he can lose by-elections mid-term. In marginals, yes, not safe seats. The problem for Johnson, though, was not just that Partygate cut the public so deep that it wouldn't actually blow over quickly, but that the scandals just keep coming. You can go along with the notion that a scandal hits a prime minister, as happens sometimes, several years away from the election, and they soldier on because, do you know what? By the time the election comes around, it will be a distant memory to voters as they troop off to the ballot box. I'd absolutely go with that. But Boris Johnson conducted his life with such entitlement, such reckless abandon, there was no way scandals would just blow over because, apart from anything else, there will always be another one round the corner. Now we hear that Boris Johnson appointed Tory donor Richard Sharp to the position of BBC chair a few weeks after Sharp arranged a loan guarantee of £800,000 for Boris Johnson, to cover his lavish lifestyle whilst trying to manage on a prime ministerial salary just above the breadline, a mere 5 times the median average. In an interview this morning, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said that Sharp was appointed on his merits, not because he helps Johnson with his financial affairs. Do we believe that? I mean, would you believe it of anybody? Never mind who it is, just for now. Don't even provide the names. Just go to a country. I'm not suggesting you do this, but let's say you were to just go to a country at the other side of the world, tell them that a man was made a senior executive for the national broadcaster by a head of government after that man arranged for an effective overdraft of $1 million for that head of government. Don't give names or even the name of the country, just the circumstances. Ask them if they think it's credible to suggest that the two events, which occurred weeks within each other, are unrelated. I don't think you'll find too many people willing to give the benefit of the doubt there. But then you add in that this is Boris Johnson, a man who got a donor to pay nearly £30,000 in a year for posh takeaway meals, another who paid for his lavish Downing Street flat refurbishment, yet others who paid for his many expensive holidays. In fact, I really don't know why Johnson used to complain about his prime ministerial stipend. He never seemed to put his hand in his own pocket for anything. When you consider Boris Johnson's grasping nature and the way in which the Tories throw favours around for donors and friends, it simply doesn't seem credible at all that Sharp's appointment was anything other than yet another example of the deepest Tory corruption. Angela Rayner's going to have her work cut out. She's Labour's Supremo on Tory sleaze, highlighting the corrupt way the Conservatives are running the country into the ground. And I was saying in the stream just yesterday that her focus now needs to be on Nadhim Zahawi, how, as Chancellor, he negotiated with HMRC to pay a 30% fine on top of his outstanding taxes, but not be prosecuted for tax evasion. The man may not be Chancellor anymore, but he is still a member of the Cabinet. Did he pressure Johnson into making him Chancellor because he thought he could use the position to apply leverage to HMRC into accepting a defence of accidental undeclared income? Why is he still a member of the Cabinet? It's a great line of attack for Labour against another example of Tory sleaze. But now this one from Boris Johnson. I think back to 1997, how the issue of Tory sleaze damaged the then Conservative government very, very badly. You look at the situation now, it's way worse. What they're getting up to now is way worse. And yet there are still Tory MPs who think Boris Johnson should return. Imagine how much more damaging this scandal would be if Johnson was still Prime Minister. And it's still front page news right now with him not Prime Minister. You know, that any Conservative, let alone a Conservative MP with an eye on their seat for the next election, can look at yet another massive scandal involving Boris Johnson, can look back at what happened at the by-elections he fought and lost once the scandal started to come out, and can think that it would be beneficial to have him back in Downing Street is a source of constant bewilderment to me. But as Napoleon seemed fond of saying, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. But still, I would imagine that most Tory MPs are paying attention to the continued scandals. For all the talks of plots against Rishi, and they're absolutely real, and I have very little doubt that an attempt to replace him with Johnson will happen at some point this year, I would still think that enough Tory MPs realise that although Sunak, he's not very good at politics, has no discernible campaigning skills, not very relatable, but that Johnson is so toxic now that he would actually be worse. You know, with Johnson back in charge, you don't just get all the old scandals becoming more newsworthy again. And remember, we're told that at least one journalist involved in reporting Partygate said she has more stuff in the locker. You know, if Boris Johnson were to return, I've got more stuff on Partygate I haven't reported on yet. But, you know, you get all the new scandals as well. The ones we didn't know about before. Johnson behaved so recklessly. They'll all come out eventually. It's always going to be in someone's interest to let it out. A more cunning corrupt leader would be more careful to cover their tracks. Johnson's level of entitlement is so strong, he doesn't even realise that he's being corrupt. You know, take the issue with Sharp being made BBC chair. You know, considering all the things I've heard about Johnson from those close to him, I would be willing to believe that he doesn't even feel he's been caught out in an act of corruption. You know, in the same way Zahawi knows he's been caught out. I don't think Johnson does. I think he probably very genuinely won't even know what all the fuss is about. As far as he's concerned, he was allowed to make that appointment. There aren't any really hard and fast rules about the criteria to be applied, so he could do so on whatever basis he pleased. He simply doesn't distinguish between what's for the national good and what's for his own good. He is a man who does not see the position of Prime Minister as a duty, but a privilege. And there are few people who are as experienced at exercising privilege as Boris Johnson, perhaps the most entitled person in politics. A man who has... He was considered insufferably entitled, even by the standards of Eton, very famously. One of the most exclusive schools for the insufferably entitled in the world. And he was too much even for them. But sure, if Tory MPs want to put him back into Downing Street, be my guest. Don't go complaining later on when it turns out that, after all, Keir Starmer wasn't worried about the prospect, but just proceeds to piss himself laughing all the way to the election. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.